Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laser Focus. This is the deep dive pop culture podcast from Nerdist. My name's Kyle Anderson. Thank you for listening. We're still in the midst of Nerdoween, folks. We're nearing the end, but here we are, still talking horror movie stuff. I was so pleased that it's a 5 Thursday month, because that means I get to do 5 spooky episodes. And joining me this week is somebody who I have known for a very long time. We used to, in fact, both work for Nerdist, pretty regularly. And over the past few years, she has blown up to the point where she has lost us in the rear view mirror. No, that's not true. But she is a horror aficionado and also has kind of branched out into just being in a bunch of horror movies. You can find them places that you watch horror movies, including Malum from 2023, Satanic Panic from a few years before that, and her brand new movie Tenants is on VOD right now. Please welcome my dear friend, Clarke Wolfe. Hey, Clarke.
Hi, Kyle. Thank you so much for having me. I'm
Of
so
course.
excited to do this. We really have known each other for a very long time.
Yeah, I feel like you and I both went to one of the early hey, we have new people working for Nerdist meetings or whatever, back
Yes.
when we all first started getting paid
My
way back.
my I remember I was hired in January 2024. Nope, that's this year.
Yeah.
January 2014.
Yeah. That sounds
Yeah,
about right.
that round. And I remember we even did Comic-Con one year, like all in an
Oh my
Airbnb.
gosh, and everybody got sick.
Everybody got
And this was
so
pre-COVID,
sick.
everybody. So it
Oh
was
my God.
we should not have been doing this even then, but
Nope, never. We should have done it. But yes, it was but that was I remember that time and being like, "Okay, from now on, I need my own room at Comic-Con."
yes.
But it
Yeah.
was such a treat. What a time.
What a time. Those were, yeah. And I was looking back so anyway, this episode, we're going to be talking about horror adaptations, specifically book adaptations and things like that. And I was going back and looking at some of our coverage. And actually, Clarke, you used to do quite a lot of junket stuff for us. You did
Yes.
the junket for Dr. Sleep, which is another
Yes.
thing. And then I went and did the premiere I guess the premiere of that at Estes Park. They actually screened it in Estes Park. And so I did a little thing there with Mike Flanagan and everything like that. And it's funny because there seems to be in the last few years a kind of I guess maybe from it forward a Stephen King renaissance. There had always been Stephen King movies, but there was a lull for a few years there where only kind of not so good ones were coming out, and then it was just somebody just decided, why don't we just keep making Stephen King adaptations, and Dr. Sleep was among that first kind of batch of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting with King specifically because, obviously, classic cinema, The Shining,
Right.
Misery winning an Academy Award and being, a huge success, The Shawshank Redemption, obviously. But I do think that it Stephen King adaptation sort of fell out of favor because it felt like the well was mined. Oh, Carrie, obviously,
Mm.
Academy Award nominations all around. But it felt like the Stephen King well has been mined. They're a little goofy, they're a little cheesy, and then I think the financial and critical success of it chapter 1, which I have to give everyone involved credit for, was an R-rated movie with kids in legitimate danger,
Yeah.
right? And I feel like that kind of shook everyone up, and people kind of went, oh. And Mike is such an interesting example too, because and I definitely want to talk about this example at some point, but I think Gerald's Game was the
Yeah.
thing that got him, with Netflix. It was obviously he had done other things, I think Hush came out before Gerald's
Mhm.
Game, so he had done other partnerships with Netflix at that time, but I think Gerald's Game sort of solidified it. And then I think, of course, Stephen King loves working with Mike and loves Mike's adaptations of his work. So I think it's such a nice partnership. And I remember, speaking of Nerdist, doing the Oculus junket.
Oh,
That was
right.
actually I think that was the first junket I ever did for Nerdist, was Oculus.
Wow.
Because I think the junket was early, and so it might have been the timeline. I think we did it in March of 14, even though it came out maybe a little later or something like that. But
Mm.
nonetheless, I remember Mike talking about The Shining. I remember him saying, "This is like my take on The Shining," and in some weird ways with the mirror and the legacy of the mirror and all of that, and the generations it has punished and traumatized before, much like the Overlook Hotel.
Yeah.
So, it's funny. I see on threads people saying Mike Flanagan is because, of course, Salem's Lot came out
Mm.
just a couple of days ago, or came out this month in October, and I see people all the time being like, Mike is the only person who should be able to adapt Stephen King. And I'm like, well, he is fabulous at it. And he is the undisputed, patron saint of Stephen King adaptations in my mind. But also, I think if maybe there were a little bit more, the studios opened up who they will trust with Stephen King adaptations,
Yeah.
you might get some really great Stephen King
Yeah.
adaptations.
And I definitely so let's talk about Salem's Lot because obviously it came out this month. It almost wasn't going to come out at all, and then it came out. And when we're talking about horror adaptations, you kind of called that out and I hadn't watched it yet, or you asked if I was going to watch it. And uh, I was planning to watch it anyway, and I'm very torn about it because like I think there's a lot of it that is clearly meddled with on a studio level. Or if somebody was like, you gotta cut this. But like it just felt knowing the book as I do, that's one of my favorite King books.
Mm,
Um, it's a long book. He's a long writer. He writes really detailed early parts of stories. That's something I really like about Stephen King and that book
same.
specifically is like the buildup is always such a huge part of his work. And getting to know all the weirdos who live in Salem's Lot before the vampire stuff really starts is so integral to kind of getting to know the fear and the dread of the rest of the story. And I really feel like this adaptation, like it just went way too fast and like we barely get to know, like a couple of the characters are in one scene. A couple of like Floyd Tibbets is like not a character basically. Like
Yeah.
a bunch of them are like that. And so that was kind of my as an adaptation. I actually don't think it's particularly good, but what are your takes on it?
Well, so I have different feelings about Salem's Lot. It's actually arguably one of my least favorite Stephen King books.
Oh, okay.
But I have to say, for your audience, I didn't come to Stephen King until I was in my 20s. Like, I
Sure.
never read a Stephen King book until I believe I was 27 years old. And it was The Shining. So I felt like that was a really good way in. And now I'm in a book club called the Losers Book Club, and we read King like every other month, So I feel
Yeah,
like I've read a lot of them, but I don't love that book. It's also very early in
it's
King's
very
career,
early.
right? And
Absolutely.
so all of his bad habits, especially like with characters, with women, with minorities, with all sorts of different things, like it's their bad habits are on display, right?
Hmm.
That's fine. It's part. Well, it's not fine. Shame, shame. But also, it's part of it's you. If you're going to read Stephen King, you have to understand you're going to watch the evolution of a man and his worldview, right? Which I think is fascinating. But what I will say is, if you're going to adapt Stephen King now, and when I say now, I know the movie had been shelved for a couple of years, but post 2020, um, the broad strokes of Salem's Lot are a town is dying. There's nothing left. These otherworldly, like wealthy people come in and they like, they're outsiders. And then all of a sudden, these vampiric parasites start kind of preying on the town. And of course, also the town turns on each other so quickly because desperate people, I think he's making a point about human beings when they are in desperate circumstances. And so that is such a timely idea.
Hmm.
And so what I love about a good adaptation, what I think is a good adaptation is maintaining the spirit of the book while not necessarily like having to be beholden to every little nook and cranny. And so I guess what I'm saying is, even if I don't like the source material, there are movies made of books I don't love all the time,
For sure.
and so I think to me, more than anything, that was the biggest missed opportunity here was like you can and the other thing is And to throw another non-king title out there, I was thinking about this with vampires because we know what vampires are, right?
Mhm.
So this Salem's Lot did not do anything new
No.
really with the vampires. So that kind of felt a little boring. Whereas, so I feel like you have to either do like excel with the storytelling, the characters, etc., or focus on the monsters. And the AMC series Interview with the Vampire, I think, is a perfect example of moving the ball forward. It's a very faithful in some way adaptation of the book, but I think it improves on the book in certain ways. And it takes into consideration that even if you don't know who Lestat and Louis are, you know what a vampire is.
Right.
The rules are simple. So now that you know the rules, we're going to really play inside of that. And so that to me is a great example of no, we don't change what vampires can do in Interview with the Vampire, but we tell a very character driven story, you know?
Yeah. No, I completely I get that entirely, and I think that there was, like there's always the king purists and for that matter, Anne Rice purists who always find something kind of, to complain about, and I remember when Interview with the Vampire was coming out, it hadn't even, like, premiered or anything yet. There were people like, "Oh, they've set it in a different time," or, like, just, like, there were bits of it that they were like, "Well, if you change this, it completely changes the whole point of the book," and it's like, that is what an adaptation is. You know, I get on people all the time who are like, "Why would you change this from the book?" And it's like, "'Cause it's a movie." Like, you can't why would you put in because otherwise, you know, especially Stephen King books, but just a lot of other books are really, really long. And it's like, unless you're gonna do a 7 season and just have a bunch of very intricate things, like, there's no reason to do that kind of thing, especially if you're only doing a single film, in the case of Salem's Lot. So it was sort of like, also, like, I'd seen the Toby Hooper one so many times that, like, I was just constantly comparing it to that one. Um, and there were some parts, but to your point about, like, everybody knowing what a vampire is, I think one of the things about Salem's Lot, the book and the Toby Hooper one, is that, like, everyone knows what a vampire is, but they're like, for a good portion of it, like, this, it can't be this, like, it right? And I feel
Yes.
like the new version, everybody jumps to, I guess it's real, like, so fast. And on the one hand, it's like, why, that's sort of refreshing, but on the other hand, it's like, what? Like,
It doesn't it yeah, for whatever reason, it just doesn't work in that. You're right though. The script, to Gary Doberman's credit, the script does have a couple of moments where the townspeople are like, I know this is gonna sound crazy. You're
right.
just gonna have to trust me. It's vampires, right? And they're like, okay. But yeah, like I agree with what you just said. It has to be like either we're, you got to do some convincing here. And I think that also comes to the character of it all, right? Like, let our characters have a moment to like see the vampires for the first time,
Yeah.
experience the vampires for the first time. Or if not, because you want to make a point about, okay, we just lived through COVID and we saw the human body mutate and change in ways that maybe we didn't expect, and you want to kind of play in that lane, fine, but just do something to make it feel like you live in this movie lives in the real world.
Yeah. And I think, like, I think Interview with the Vampires are really excellent, because obviously that's adapting a series of books into a show. So, like, that's, they have more time and there's more characters and all that. But, like, because we all know what a vampire is, like, when King was writing Salem's Lot, I believe that book came out in 75, I think.
Yeah, 75. The year that the new movie is set is
Right.
1970.
Yes,
The year it
exactly.
come yeah.
Um, it's sort of like you can get away with it being kind of just a straightforward vampire thing, because it had been a while since there had been, like, I'm actually, like, a modern set yet really gothic vampire story, because, like, famously, Barlow looks like Nosferatu, like,
Yes.
instead of, it's not Dracula, it's, and he has a familiar and all this stuff, and there's the trappings of it, and it just happens to be in this, like, tiny little dying, Maine town. um that doing that today and not changing very much about it, other than maybe a couple of the characters being black, like, that's
Mhm.
literally the only major changes they made in terms of, like, updating it.
Right.
um it just it doesn't do a whole lot. I do think there were some good scenes in it, like sequences, and like I'm not faulting the filmmaking. It looked
Yeah,
really good and all this
agreed.
stuff, but I just think like they weren't. I'm not sure what the idea was. Was it just let's do a very faithful adaptation of Salem's Lot? But it's like we kind of already had that with the TV movie, and we also had there were two miniseries because there was the Rob Lowe one in the mid 2000s or whatever.
Sure.
Um, so yeah, I was sort of just kind of left going, I don't really know why this happened. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
I
glad
mean,
I got to see it. I'm glad we all get to see it, but I was sort of like, if you're not going to do anything interesting with it, like it did do something interesting, I just don't really understand the point, I guess.
I think it chapter 1 to me is an example of one of the best book to
Hmm.
film adaptations I have maybe ever seen, but especially in horror.
Yeah,
I think it and Eyes of the Dragon are my two favorite Stephen King books.
love it.
And so when and I'll be honest, like I was one of those people. Oh gosh, I mean, I don't even want to send people to look for it because I was very sassy when I used to write for Nerdist. But uh, I actually wrote an op-ed, the Memorial Day weekend that Cary Fukunaga got off of it chapter 1, and went with him was Will Poulter as Pennywise and like all these things, and I was really bummed that he at that time that he was not doing it because he was this announcement was coming in the wake of True Detective. That said, I think Andy did an incredible job, but and I loved chapter 1, but my point is I was skeptical.
Right.
I was skeptical of a mainstream Hollywood adaptation of it with a hot Pennywise. Like I wasn't buying it. And then
Yeah.
I saw it. I actually got to see it early, unfinished, and I was like, holy crap, this is great. But to me, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, the
Mm,
spark and the essence of the book is so present in chapter 1, even if like my favorite sequence, the Neibolt Street house sequence, is not in the book. Neibolt Street house is in the book, you know what I mean? But like that, the whole fun house elements and the kids being trapped in the house and all
yeah.
that, like that's not in the book, but it felt so pure and so inspired by the material, so authentically inspired by the material, that to me, that is an example of what makes a great adaptation.
Hmm. And that the two movies together, I think, is an interesting case study because they decided to split it up. It is a very long book. Like it is.
Yes.
It. I think I'm going to keep saying it, but that's the title, and
Yes.
also it, the article,
Yes.
um, the noun. Um, along with The Stand, I believe it is his longest books,
Yes.
by far, actually. And so the idea was, especially in the wake of Stranger Things, like let's make it kid focused and like just kind of because there's these parallel stories of the same characters in it. The idea to just let's just strip it down and just do the kids in the past and stuff. I think that was such a brilliant idea and it works so well, and you get all the payoffs that you want from the characters and the monster and the showdown and everything like that. I think it works so well. And then the second movie, it's doing all the stuff that is like the less interesting parts of the book, because like it's all just the same stuff again. Do you know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah.
I kind of don't think, not that the book is bad in that respect, but if you're just going to do a sequel that is the exact, but just the later stuff in the book from the book, I don't think that really. And so it didn't work for me because there's so many of the beats are exactly the same that I was just kind of like, and the casting is great. Like everybody is really good as the older versions of those kids. I just kind of was like less enthused by it.
Well, and this is where I think it comes down to really like to me, doing chapter 2 with the adults was always going to be riskier,
Mm,
because the things that you're afraid of when you're an adult are very different than what you're afraid of when you're a kid. And so, honestly, like to be fair, there is more written material in the book revolving around the children. So they
yes.
did have more to
Hmm.
mine there. But in terms of the adults, like, you know, I really was disappointed that they didn't go for it there.
Mhm.
Like some of the stuff, the human horrors, of course, that the Losers Club deals with as adults, but also like I always remember the image of Stan Uris's head in I think a refrigerator, after he's like killed himself, and it's in the library, and he's
Mhm.
talking to them and he's taunting them, and it is like vile and it is so scary, and it is also just like our friend killed themselves, and because they could not face this thing that was so traumatic for them as a child. Like those are the themes that if I don't I'm very disappointed that they went in a completely different direction. You can still have the fun and the adventure,
Mhm.
but like I think arguably what makes chapter 1 work so well is like yeah, we're focusing on what scares you as a kid, but like when you're a grown up, now we really got to focus on not a clown coming after you. It's no, it's your husband beating you. It is, alcoholism. It is racism. It is legacy. It is all, you know what I'm saying? Like
Mhm.
I feel like they kind of took a cheap way out, and it didn't work, and it didn't work.
No. And especially when the climax is exactly the same. Like, it's like
Yeah, just member berries all
yeah.
over. Which like
Yeah.
we've seen this.
We have,
Yes.
yeah.
Weird choices, but that seemed, if I may, I remember watching it and being like, this feels kind of like the bloat that I've come to expect from New Line's sequels at that time. A lot of the like, okay, this first horror movie that New Line has put out, blew up. Well, more. Let's double the runtime. Let's, do the same thing, but a little different. And like, you can kind of look back at that generation of films that kind of recently concluded, especially with Zaslav coming in and with James and Atomic Monster leaving.
Mhm.
But yeah, like I don't know. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but yeah, it's just the bloat is more studio to me than maybe necessarily creative, but I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely I get that feeling, and it's sort of I think there's, horror, as we both know, is like always you can make really cheap horror movies and make money. Like, that's the way horror works. And so I feel like a lot of times, not 100% of the time, when they go, well, let's do the thing we do with regular blockbusters and just toss a ton of money behind it, you kind of get diminishing returns, because it's like ultimately we don't need all the bells and whistles and the bloat, like you're saying. Like, we don't need big giant horror action sequences the way we need, or people think we need, like big superhero action sequences. So yeah, I kind of am like, I'm less excited by a ton of sequels in that sense, because it's just like, well, what are we going to do that? I was really stoked about this, brand new idea or whatever.
Mhm.
But then the other side of it is, well, let's, make 700 different paranormal activity movies that are still the exact same level of not not big budget.
Yeah, 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 and at the same time, like, at least with that franchise too, you have the opportunity to, like, build in and weave some real mythology in the first 3
Mhm.
films, and then, and then the marked ones, but after that, the mythology kind of falls by the wayside. But I bring that up because it's like, yeah, if you're not gonna, sink a ton of money into it, then yeah, can you please give us a story to hang on to? And I know that sounds silly to some people, but I actually really loved that franchise,
Mm.
up through the marked ones. I really, really liked the marked ones. And then after that, it's just like whatever, because they lose sight of like, it's just not understanding what makes it's so funny. We talk so much about the fans, and I'm like, yeah,
Mm.
do you guys even really understand why people like your movies? Or do you think it's just like, I don't know, but
I
this
do
is
wonder that, because in general, I think the people who make horror movies do understand their audience, because most of the time, the people making them are the audience. And so they kind of,
yes.
and I don't want to, this is certainly a little far afield of what we're actually like,
Yeah,
the
sorry, I
topic.
steered us off topic.
No, completely okay. But like, there are so many good horror movies coming out that are indie, or from like, smaller studios overseas and things like that. There are so many good, and you can find them on streaming quite easily for the most part. Um, that I'm like, when it comes to big studio horror, I'm like, you really need to like, uh, Nosferatu coming out, but it's like, that's still got the weird kind of indie vibe to it. Um, Whereas something, I don't know, I'm trying to think of another one that came out fairly recently, but like, I can't off the top of my head think of any.
Sure.
But
Uh,
go ahead, please.
no, please. What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say that like, um, they really have to do something special with it if it's a big, or because I'm just tired of seeing like, you know, as much as I love it, like Halloween movies, I don't need those anymore. Like, I know they've been trying forever to get Friday the 13th off the ground again. It's like, I don't really need that anymore. Like, there are so many new, interesting ideas. And also, what horror is and what's scary to people is different now. Um,
Yes.
there was that whole spate of movies there maybe a decade ago that were all about like, um, a lot of it were like women dealing with new motherhood. Like that was a
Mhm.
huge thing in horror for a long while, like between Mama, speaking of Andy, and
Mhm.
the Babadook, like things like that
Mhm.
were just like what's scary is being a mom or being a
Sh
young person having to be responsible and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
now I feel it's much more like, I mean, I don't even know if there's like a direct thing, but there's so much more kind of like folkiness. We had an episode a couple weeks ago, folks listening, about folk horror specifically, and I
Mm.
feel like there is so much more kind of just rural horror and sort of folklore based horror nowadays. And maybe I'm just only noticing it now because I'm kind of more aware of what folk horror is. But what are sort of your and then we'll get back to adaptations. But like,
Sure,
what are
sure.
sort of your noticings about the state of where horror is now in terms of themes and whatnot?
Yeah, well, being sort of on a little bit of all sides of it, not only as a fan, but
Yeah,
like trying to sell scripts and like starting to, like okay, what are people buying right now in the state of the industry and so on. I'm seeing a lot of these, like, almost gamified, I don't know if that's the right word, but, like, I think of something like Smile or Talk to Me. These are movies that are supernatural, they have very clear rules, and it's just almost like a ticking time bomb, like, how can I stop or how can I defeat, or prevent this thing from catching up to me? And, I think that that's all really, really interesting. And I think that, but I do wonder how many versions of that are we gonna get, or are we gonna do before audiences are kind of like, oh yeah, well, I've seen this, except this time it's the hand, or this time but it's a smile, or but it's whatever. That's and by the way, I actually very much like Smile and Talk to Me. So this is
sure.
not me like saying anything negative. It's just trend. That
Yeah.
those are like sort of the big trends that are speaking that, or that I'm noticing in terms of studio horror. And then of
Hmm.
course, the indie stuff is always going to be a little different. The indie stuff that goes big, I guess I should say, like the
Yeah.
sub $10 million movies that end up blowing up.
Yeah. I, I I brought up my list of movies that I've seen this year because I keep it on Letterboxd. Everybody.
Great, smart. I know I need to start doing that because I go blank anytime someone asks me, "What have you seen? What did you like?"
um, but so like Long Legs was a huge hit, and like
Yes, great
I would
example.
that's like a mid-budget movie, I think, by today's standards. But I do think like A24 less so, but like Neon, which is who put out that movie,
Mhm.
like they're actually like looking for kind of smaller, cool idea indie movies to put out on indie horror movies to put out. And I think that's a good example of that. So I'm just gonna list all the horror movies I've seen this year so far.
Great.
Long Legs, Red Rooms. Have you seen Red Rooms yet?
No, but I was in New York and it was playing the IFC, and Sam Zimmerman from Shudder told me to go see it, and I couldn't find a time, but I
It's
know that is on my list.
it's great. Um Oddity, which is the Irish movie.
Yes, that is also on my list, and I'm waiting for a friend so that we can watch
Okay.
it together.
That I also really liked. Um, I guess Alien Romulus, which I thought was fine.
Oh,
The Vordelak, which
yeah.
is another. That's a weird one. It's the French movie kind of based on the Tolstoy novel.
Mm.
But the cool thing about that one, it's about an old timey vampire, like Slavic style vampire, but it's a rod puppet the whole time.
Oh.
So it's like he's an old gaunt man who became a vampire, and the whole point of the story, the movie, is that his family knows he's a vampire, but kind of are like, well, he's our dad. Like we still have to kind of, but
Kind of
he's a
like let the right one in and
kind of, yeah, but like he's the patriarch. So they're like kind of afraid of him and all this stuff, but
mm,
he's clearly a monster, like to the point where it's not even a guy. It's a puppet. So that I
funny.
thought was cool. Stop motion, which is another sort of like weird British one.
Yep, seen that one.
I just watched both I Saw the TV Glow and In a Violent Nature, which are both quite interesting.
I just loved In a Violent Nature, and it's funny because when you were talking about Friday the 13th, like, do I need another Friday the 13th? Do I need another Halloween? I thought to myself, in a lot of ways, In a Violent Nature is an adaptation of the Friday the 13th lore.
Right.
And to me, it is a very successful adaptation because it takes the groundwork that has been laid in the 1980s and with the tropes that we all know, and then updates them, or at the very least, not even updates them, frankly, just explores them in a way I haven't seen before.
Yeah.
So I really, really loved In a Violent Nature.
So the interesting thing about that one, and I'll stop reading them because after that point, I'm like, these are ones I just didn't like. So
Okay, fair,
so there's
fair.
no point. I don't want to just throw filmmakers under the bus for no
No,
reason.
no, no.
But while watching In a Violent Nature, I was like, because I knew vaguely that it was kind of a slow, methodical thing where you're following the killer. I was like digging it, and then in the middle when it was like just very, very drawn out violent kills, I was kind of like, okay. And I was maybe on the verge of not liking it very much anymore. And then the last 20 minutes, I was hella back in, and I've thought about it ever since. So
That's so funny. The last 20 minutes or the last, I would say not even 20 minutes. The last 10 minutes
sure, 10 minutes.
are where they well, and I wasn't trying to correct. I just was saying, like, for me, it lost me at the very end.
See, yeah.
And yeah,
Hmm.
but that was honestly for me, that was because it broke its own rules. And
Yes.
that, in my opinion, as a viewer, it broke its own rules. And so that's why I was like, well, I don't love this choice, but like 9 out of 10 for me.
Right.
Loved, you know?
Yeah. And I don't, it's on Shutter now. If people want to watch it, I don't want to give too much away. But for me, it was sort of like there's only so much you can. And actually, they did a really good job of like kind of getting us to know about the undead murder monster.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Johnny, I think, is that
yeah,
his name?
Johnny.
Johnny.
Like in a way that I was like not expecting at all to be, because Jason is not a particularly interesting character, but
Right.
Johnny I thought actually was a pretty interesting character, even though he's doing the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, I thought it was great. And like, but what I really liked about the ending is that because it shifts focus, I think that's the main thing. It becomes about where is he now? Like he could
Mm-hmm.
be everywhere, and he is everywhere. And like, he just sort of like, I read something about it as being an allegory about, environmentalism in a way. And it was sort of like, he's not, he is defending the forest specifically from people like messing up the forest. And it's like, oh, that's an interesting kind of idea.
Oh, okay.
So
Smokey the Bear. All
yeah, yeah,
right.
exactly. I mean, he does a lot of logging equipment
He
involved.
does. He does. That's really funny. I mean, look, I've been trying to read. I actually did a little video about this on my Instagram and TikTok where I was like, where I said I loved the movie, but where did the choice for this ending come from?
Right.
Does anybody know? And a couple people chimed in and they were like, well, it's supposed to represent not like what you're saying. It was like it's a commentary on another type of slasher film. And I was like, okay, that doesn't necessarily make sense for me, but okay. And then another person chimed in and they said, I was at a film festival with the director, who's the writer as well. And he said, we had a whole other thing planned. And then we scrapped it at the last minute and went with
Weird.
this. And I was like, oh, now that's interesting,
Yeah.
know? And, so I'm just so curious, but you know what? That we're getting a confirmed sequel, and so I bet we're gonna get all the answers to
I'm sure we will.
my questions, and so I'm here for it. I'll be there.
Me too.
Yeah, but yeah, there's a lot of that's the thing is like, again, I know we're talking about like adaptations, but it's funny to see how a trend in a lot of ways, like filmmakers kind of jumping onto a trend, is almost an adaptation of the thing that like kind of broke it through in the first way. Like Paranormal Activity. Okay,
Right.
now we have a bunch of these like a bunch of people going, all right, how do I adapt this formula or what I think of the formula, and then how can I make it fit me or make it fit otherwise? And I don't know, it's interesting to see how the trends in horror, for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned both Smile and Talk to Me, and I
Hmm.
I also liked both of those movies,
Hmm.
and I don't think either of them need sequels, and they both are getting them. So
Okay, the one thing I will say about Smile 2 is this concept is bananas.
okay.
Like just the I've only seen the teaser, but like, the Smile curse kind of taking on to this international huge pop star and passing it on to mass amounts of people through fame and idol worship. I'm like, all right, you have me, movie, because that is, I want to see how y'all do this. I
Yeah.
want to see how it goes. And so that one, it has me. And then, like as far as with Talk to Me goes, I will say the I'm a big mythology nerd, which is why I think I also really love adaptations, like successful adaptations, because
Mhm.
I like reading like the rules and the source material and then being like, now how can I put a puzzle piece to put all these puzzle pieces together and Tetris them into my own version of the thing. And so with Talk to Me, I do think that maybe the rules or the ending got the end, and not harping on like endings, just saying like, I don't know if it really stuck the landing, but I had so much fun with it. It didn't matter. Like, I don't care. I had a blast and love Talk to Me. But
Mhm.
that's another one where I'm like, I want to see them kind of clarify their worldview, clarify the mythology, and then kind of go as a little bit more experienced filmmakers. And audience, I know they make movies and shorts and videos like all the time. They're very accomplished filmmakers, but maybe like feature film is what I'm trying to say.
No, for sure, and, like, and it's also a much different film, or kind of style of horror than they did it as short
Hmm.
filmmakers too. They were very, like, big and violent and, like, in your face kind of, like, short makers, and then that movie is very kind of like
Oh, it's so performance based.
yeah,
It's so that cast, that is the thing that blew my mind and made it work, if you
yeah,
ask me.
yeah, that was one of my favorite movies. When was that, last year that they came
Yeah,
out? Yeah,
same. I loved
I
it.
really enjoyed that movie, and yeah, I like lore as well. I like rules, I guess, is more like storylines and sort of like backstories and things like that. Like lore, I think nowadays is sort of getting a bad rap because of people like only caring about that and
Mhm.
a lot of times it's like, why? Who cares? Like,
But, this is kind of like with the King and the Anne Rice kind of
yeah, yeah,
comparisons. I'm so freaking thrilled that AMC is giving these properties the series treatment, because you can look at it from a cynical perspective, I suppose, of like, oh, well, they could just keep it going forever. But I don't think it's that. I think that these things, these very dense mythologies, lore, like you're talking about, I think a lot of times require more time. And that's sort of why, to get back to like our earlier conversation about the Stephen King of it all, I think that that is why a lot of these films don't necessarily feel satisfying, because they need more time. They need
mm,
more space in order to really capture the world. Or you have to strip out the main themes and you have to focus only on the main themes, the main characters, if you're going to do a feature, and not get so like, because it's easy to get untethered in the Stephen King universe, or any lore heavy
yeah,
novels or whatever, or series.
yeah. I feel like, and there's a lot of examples recently too, and a lot of that is like, and maybe Doctor Sleep is an interesting example because that is obviously an adaptation of a specific book and also a sequel to a movie that did not fully adapt the book. Like,
Unbelievable how
yeah,
Mike pulled that off.
yeah, and that was one of like I anytime I get to talk to him is amazing, but like just like being like, okay, so what? Like,
I
I kind of wanted to be like, uh, First question: why'd you cut out all the 9/11 stuff? No, because there's a lot in the book.
There sure is.
Weirdly
I
enough,
I do like Doctor Sleep, but there's a lot of weird stuff in there.
yeah, it's a strange book. I read them back to back before that junket or before that trip that
Yeah.
I went on. It was because I hadn't actually ever read The Shining before. Which we'll talk about The Shining in a few because
Yes.
there's a very specific reason to talk about The Shining.
Yes.
But there are so many adaptations of Stephen King, and he puts in so much. Obviously, there's like whole wiki like sites dedicated to like his intricate mythologies and stuff like that. And again, Mike is adapting the Dark Tower series. It's like,
Yes.
well, who else? Because right at the same time that it was coming out and also Gerald's Game was coming out, Sony did their ill-fated attempt at a feature film version of the Dark Tower,
Which
and that was
I
the one that was like, jeez, like
if I may interject
you
that,
certainly
like,
may.
that movie does not work. However, talk about, in my opinion, very good casting. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
I just like those were the right people in the right roles at the complete wrong time.
Hmm.
Like I love Idris Elba as the gunslinger, or I love Matthew McConaughey as Randall Flagg. Like that iteration of Randall Flagg, at least,
Yeah.
like that is great casting. And I just, boy, I'm so bummed that the movie just frankly just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Ill-fated, like you said.
And I think so. What's funny about that movie is that it is a adaptation of the series as a whole, but it's not an adaptation of the first book.
Right.
It's sort of just kind of its own ethereal thing. And I think that's the problem. Like
Yeah.
that's one of many problems, but um is that like you have this great source material. You can adapt King. We've seen it be done.
Mhm.
You can adapt, it came out that same year. Like there is so much there to kind of change and make your own and kind of like whatever. And the fact that they just kind of did all of it and none of it at the same time, I think is it's in sharp contrast when you have those other two great, like, Gerald's Game is a verbatim, basically like adaptation of that once thought unfilmable book. And then it is a very specific adaptation of that huge giant book.
So, okay, Gerald's Game.
Love it.
Example. So I was there at the world premiere at Fantastic Fest, I believe. I think that was the world premiere. Mike was there. It was really cool. I had started reading Gerald's Game, but I just didn't get very far into it. And I'm sure I rented it on my library app for my audiobooks and it just expired before I finished. Okay, fine. I see the movie, I read all the trades, and it's like, thought to be unfilmable. And I'm like, oh, because it's in, she's talking to herself
Right.
for all these, and like the isolation, one character, like, how do you do this? Okay, great, fine. Then I read the book earlier this year, and oh my, I didn't realize that when they said unfilmable, it was because that is some of the most. Have you read Gerald's Game?
I haven't.
Ooh, okay. Well, all I'll say is there are themes, trigger warning, of abuse, of child
Right.
abuse.
Mhm.
And I think Mike handles it delicately, but also, is not shy
Right.
about what is going on with Jesse. And he pulls it off. When I read this book, we were talking about King earlier and his bad impulses. This is grotesque how graphic King gets and does not stop talking about it. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying like silence no. It felt gratuitous, it felt icky, it
Mhm.
felt inappropriate, and I was just like, shame on you, Stephen King. Like, yeah, like this is you at some of your just worst impulses, right?
Right.
So that's when I read that, I was like, oh shit, oh sorry, I was like, oh, this is why this was unfilmable, not because it was one location and she's talking to herself for 2 hours. It's because this is like, he needs to be on a watch list. Like, it
Mm.
is vile. So if anyone is ever interested in reading that book, it's a fascinating case study in the example of adaptations, but please be warned,
Right.
it is rough stuff.
Yeah. I And it's interesting too that then Mike Flanagan, who's obviously like a dyed on the wool Stephen King fan, recognizes that like, well, this is I love this story, but we can't obviously, nor would anyone want to. And you're right, like you should be on a watch list. Like I'm reading between the lines here. Again, I haven't read it, but
Mhm.
like I'm
Mhm.
assuming that there's a fair amount of
Whew.
he's very good at detail and description of things.
Mhm.
So
Mhm. Mhm.
believe
Yes.
that doesn't
Yeah,
sound fun.
it's rough, but, also this is why Mike is so successful, I think, is because he does love the work, he does love the art, but I think he also understands, like, you can not love your heroes 100% completely and think that they are perfect gifts from God that never did anything right. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, Mike is also a good filmmaker, so
right.
naturally when you're gonna make an adaptation, you have like what here I will give speaking of The Shining, I don't love Stanley Kubrick's movie. I never have loved Stanley Kubrick's movie even before I read the book. I know obviously there's
Mhm.
like that sort of tension between the two versions of the story, right? But what I will say is I think Kubrick, like a great example, Kubrick did a brilliant thing by not doing the topiaries and the hedge animals, right? The hedge animals coming to life and scaring a child, like as they do in the book. Instead, he turns us into the maze, right? And I think that that is such a brilliant, still inspired by the essence of the scare, the essence of the fear, but also this is going to look way better on film than trying to stop motion animate at that time, or even in the 1990s when you get the Mick Garris, more faithful adaptation to the book mini series. The hedge animals look awful. Like
Yeah,
they do not look good. And frankly right now I think that would be hard to do now and make it scary, because again, when you're in the mind of a child, yes, something coming to life and almost stomping on you is scary in your mind, but we're grown-ups watching an R-rated movie. That is not going to be scary to us. You know what I
right.
mean?
Absolutely. No, I completely agree because there's something about the written word too, and that's what makes it a lot of it adaptation so hard and and a really good one really impressive is that you can read things and your mind fills it in and buys it so much easier. But then if you see it, and that's a perfect example because it was that early '90s Mick Garris, thing. You can have, I mean, because even like the It miniseries, which everybody loves,
Ugh, not
the
I, said the fly. It
I,
scared me a lot when I was a child,
of course,
admittedly, but then I went back and watched it and I was like, woof.
and I appreciate that they put stop motion in there, but the stop motion Spider Boy does not work very well. Um, but so let's, to get off of King a little bit,
Yeah.
but still stick with our boy Mike Flanagan because he's great.
Yeah.
He has also adapted uh Shirley Jackson and what's his
Oh,
face?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Henry,
Uh-huh.
who wrote
James.
Henry James, thank you very much.
Yes.
And Edgar Allan Poe. And
Yes.
it's sort of like, and the whole time also, sidebar, the whole time I was watching Salem's Lot, I was like, you know what the best version of Salem's Lot is? Midnight
Midnight
Mass.
Mass. Yep. And guess what? Kyle Threads agrees with you.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure it does. I'm not on Threads.
Yeah. Well, you're
Um,
you're you're fine. You're really missing nothing.
Great. Good to know. But yeah, like as a fan of all of those, I read Henry James after I saw that the Haunting of Bly Manor.
Yes.
I knew I'd seen adaptations of Turn of the Screw before, but
Sure.
the rest of it I hadn't read. But like I had read Haunting of Hill House, and I had read most of, if not all, of Edgar Allan Poe at that point.
Yeah.
And like the Poe one is, I just think like a very impressive thing because it's like putting 28 disparate stories in the same like show and having
Yes.
it be both an anthology series and a narrative series. I thought that was a genius move, but like also then taking the relatively small and internal Haunting of Hill House and making it into a family drama. Like
Oh,
that is I would never have thought to do something like that. And it's even to, that might still be his best just work. It's arguable. I think Midnight Mass is also a pretty, masterpieceful thing. But
Mm.
what do you think of those specials and their adaptations?
Oh my goodness. So, Haunting of Hill House, I think, and look, Mike, if you're listening, I hope you prove me wrong,
If
because
Mike's
it means
listening, hi Mike,
because
please come
it
on the show.
means yeah, please come on the show, Mike, because it means that we got a long career ahead of you, and you're going to give me more and more and more and more goodness. But
Yeah.
I think that Haunting of Hill House is Mike's masterpiece, which is also funny because he has been very open about how it literally almost killed him.
Yes. Yes.
So we don't need that. We don't want
No.
that to happen.
No. No. No.
Art should and work should be, fun and accessible. It should not almost kill you. You should not kill yourself for a job or a TV show. But I just think it is such a understanding of the themes and understanding of the characters and understanding, honestly, of the genre. So I think that the remixing, the haunted house element,
Hmm.
and the ghosts, and what do the ghosts, not only in Shirley Jackson's novel, but also in our world, in our sort of culture, what do ghosts represent to
Mhm.
us? And it is uniquely, well, it's not uniquely, but I do think that this is a very American tale of, obviously these themes are relatable across the world,
Mhm.
but, especially given what we were coming out of with our housing crisis in the United States, and people who are going after that American dream and providing for your family, and then of course it all just crashes and burns. That feels very American to me, and I think that Mike is just like tapping into what all of the ghosts literally and figuratively mean. While also having such a deep understanding of those core characters. It's just I watch it. I watch it every Christmas, actually, funny enough, because it just feels
Hmm.
so haunted and haunting.
Yes.
And then House of the Fall of Usher. No, I always do that. Fall of the House of Usher. I watch it now every Halloween. I just wrapped it up, actually. I just watched it again. I
It's
love it. It's so fun. It's just fun.
yeah. It's incredible. And like some of that stuff, I cannot see a warehouse now and go without going, oh, there's probably a death orgy going on in there. Like just it's and that is a gruesome show. Like I think
Oh yeah.
there's you can probably level, at least for a time, you could level the complaint about or the criticism of Mike Flanagan that he kind of pulls punches in terms of like graphicness and in
Mm.
violence and things like that. There's still violence and kind of gruesome imagery in his stuff, but like between Midnight Mass and Fall of the House of Usher, it's like, okay, this is some bloody and horrifying stuff.
Yeah, I think
Um,
he joked that it was like his giallo, basically, or something,
honestly, yeah,
and how he was like, no more of this, no more of this sad sack stuff. We're nope. There's like, this is all fun, baby. This is metal. Like, I think he actually said like, this is our our rock show, or like
yeah,
our metal show, as opposed to, our more so heartfelt, like,
yeah.
sad shows.
Um, I love what you said about watching it at Christmas time because I completely agree. I watch and read M.R. James a lot at Christmas time.
Okay.
M.R. James was a British writer who wrote a ton of like very. His first book was called "Ghost Stories of an Antiquary" because he was a college adjunct professor at Cambridge, I think.
Okay.
And was like one of the world's foremost like medieval historians. And
Oh
just for
wow.
fun, for the boys at Christmas, he would write
Love
ghost
it.
stories and then read them out. And then they got put into books and things like that. And then those in the 70s got adapted to TV specials on the BBC, which are now being done, not again, but like
Oh.
still being adapted nowadays by Mark Gatiss, of course, did, one of the Sherlock writers and everything like that. So anyway,
Fun. Okay.
I love them. I have read them many times. I've watched them many times. I feel like Christmas time is the perfect time for ghosts.
Agreed.
Um, I get why that's a thing in the UK, and I for such a long time never got it. I was always like, why is a Christmas Carol about ghosts? Like, it's because it's part and parcel to what Christmas is in the UK is ghosty creepiness. I love it.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't think of this until just now, but I could go on for days about A Christmas Carol and
Yeah.
like the adaptations of A Christmas Carol. Like we're like ever since A Christmas Carol came out, I do feel like it changed the subgenre of a haunting. You know, it just like it's such a wonderful horror story and also human story,
Mhm.
and I love so many of the adaptations. My two favorite adaptations of A Christmas Carol are Scrooged and Muppet Christmas Carol.
Sure.
You know,
Could yeah, very different, obviously.
truly, but like
Yeah.
it's every time I watch Scrooge, because I now read A Christmas, or actually I listen to Tim Curry read me A Christmas Carol
I mean,
every
if you're
year.
gonna do it, yeah.
I mean, come on. But as a result, like every time, and I know I've loved Scrooge since I was a kid, but every time I watch that movie now, I'm like, holy crap, they got A Christmas Carol. You
Mhm.
know, what they got about it was how brutal Scrooge is. Because, you know, like I used to host a show for AMC Networks. It was called Wolf's Call. And for 2+ years, once a week, I would do a deep dive into a horror movie. So we would talk about like the context of the time, who are the major players, where were they at in their careers, and then we do like pause and plays. It was really fun. It was like basically teaching a class, you know, about a movie every week, and I loved doing it. But every Christmas, I did A Christmas Carol, or I did Scrooged both times, and you know, I could go on about this, but like the negative reviews of Richard Donner's Scrooged at that time was that it was too mean. And I was like, "Oh, you're telling on yourselves that you've never read A Christmas Carol."
Right. Right.
Because Scrooge is a monster. He
Right.
is awful. He's not some cutesy old man in a top hat who goes, "Rah," you know, like whatever. He's a monster. He's willing to let people die for to save his bottom line, and he doesn't care. He just like, anyway, I'm not telling anyone anything they don't know about A Christmas Carol,
Right.
but I do love those two adaptations because both Michael Caine and Bill Murray are embodying, and again, inspired by. I think that's like, I'm the type of person who's like, give me something that is the essence of the source material. And that's what I feel like those two are in many ways.
And it shows you just how versatile that source material is because like Scrooged is it's like it's a meta movie before like I even knew what meta was. It's about
Yes.
somebody putting on the Christmas Carol for television and he's a, you know, a heartless, you know, TV exec and everything like
Yeah.
that. And that's a pretty faithful adaptation in terms of the tone
Yes.
and the kind of you know, the meanness like you were saying. And then you have a Muppet Christmas Carol and you go, well, there's Muppets involved. But that is a straight down the line
Yes.
adaptation. It's a bit short. That's the only like criticism I have of it. And they
Hmm.
had to add songs, but like the songs are great too. So
I
like
like the songs. Yeah.
yeah, it's Paul Williams. How can you not like Paul
I
Williams?
mean, yeah, they're pretty good.
Um and yeah, so like and my favorite one is always the George C. Scott one from the 80s because that one's actually British made and
Yes.
it's creepy. It like it has the scariest Marley in it. But like there's a company called Four Horsemen that makes toys like quite elaborate big kind of maquette toys. And they have a line of holiday inspired ones and they have like the Krampus and then they also have like the kind of like Father Christmas like the big burly one. But then they're putting out this year a Jacob Marley with like, you know,
The
extendo jaw and stuff
chains.
like that. And it's just like,
Wow.
that is so awesome because that is a scary part of that movie. And like the Ghost of
Yeah.
Christmas Yet to Come is a scary part of that story because it's the future and it's like, it's that is a downbeat part of that story. Like, and if you watch that, which I don't think is an amazing film, but that movie, The Man Who Invented Christmas, which is about Dickens writing
Yes.
that story, he didn't like Scrooge. He was like, this guy sucks. Like, he's a real, I don't like people like this. Like,
Yes.
and
Yes.
so, and
Absolutely.
had to be convinced to redeem him at the end because he was
Ugh.
just like, this guy sucks and he should go to hell, basically.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah,
It doesn't pull punches. I mean,
no.
I do like, so yes, he is redeemed in the end. And but I don't think that that's a cop out. I'm not saying that's what you're saying. I'm just saying like
Mm-mm.
I think it is earned, and I think it is like that is what we have to believe, not at Christmas, but as humans.
Right.
We have to believe that we are capable of doing better. And, I do think that Dickens does such a great job of showing us, Jacob Marley, and like, he did not do better, and he's like, ah, shit. Oh, again, I cursed again. I'm
It's
sorry,
fine.
Kyle.
It's fine, Clark. It's fine.
Um, but he's like, oh gosh, like I didn't do this right. Don't be like,
Yeah.
and yeah, and Scrooge gets the memo. Like that's what we hope. At least that's what I hope for the people I can think of who are powerful monsters. Is I hope they're visited by three ghosts and they wake up tomorrow and they want to buy everybody a Christmas goose.
Yeah.
Like we should be so lucky, honestly, if they can find that humanity and find their redemption arc. That's what I hope for.
Yeah. And that is what, like, not to get into like the sort of like, because the thing about Christmas time that I don't like is just the thoughtless positivity that I think so much of the world kind of has about it. And that's
Yes.
why I kind of get into like the kind of gloomier part
The
of it. And
melancholy.
the
Yes.
because it's the midwinter. You should be melancholy at that time of year. But I think the takeaway, the positive takeaway of something like A Christmas Carol is the hope that as awful as the world is, maybe somebody will have a change of heart because the world can be kind and all this.
Yes.
Like it has such a good message that like
Yes.
there's a reason why we keep doing it. And I do think you're right that people just kind of don't read the book and just are like, it has to be happy and it has to be, it's just like,
Yeah, that's not the point,
Yeah.
but okay. Actually, as we were talking, I thought of another one
Great.
that I can't believe I didn't think of. It's a case study that I love, and it is actually kind of a comparison to The Shining in a way. But you're gonna have to go with me on this
Okay,
one.
let's do it.
It's Jaws, Peter Benchley's
Sure.
Jaws. Have you ever read Jaws, the book?
I have a long time ago.
Yeah. It's trash in the best way. And I mean that like to quote the intro that Stephen King wrote to Salem's Lot, it's good trash.
Right.
That's what we aspire to as pop culture enthusiasts, is like not everything has to be so meaningful and like this and that. And like sometimes you just want something yummy and trashy to like, some candy, right? So Jaws, the book, I mean, good gracious. It's very similar in a lot of ways to The Shining, where it's like the names are the same, the broad strokes are the same, the setting is the same, but everything else is completely different,
Right. Yeah.
And so though, what I love, and I'm gonna Nerdist audience, hello, it's me, Clark. I've been here for an hour now. This is one of my dream projects, and you're going to tell me that I'm probably crazy because I haven't mentioned this. Actually, we've been talking for an hour and I haven't mentioned this, but I actually have the rights to a higher profile author's books, one of his books. I've adapted it into the script is done, and right now I'm trying to get it set up someplace. So I have actually, I know with what I speak, I have adapted. I pitched the author. I said, I love this book. This is the material. This is my take on it. I think it's a movie. I don't think it's a series. Here's what I love about it. And had to do that work of stripping down a book that I really love, but like still doing things inspired by the book, but keeping it to 100 and, under 120 pages, under 2 hours, right?
Yeah.
So I say this to say that in my dream world, someone please let me adapt Peter Benchley's Jaws into a summer miniseries and let me adapt the book. We'll call it Amity. Nobody needs to we're not remaking Jaws. No,
Right.
no. We are adapting the book. Brody is a jerk. He sucks. He's the worst. Hooper is banging his wife. Love it. The mafia is involved. What? I mean, just like trash, but so fun. And this is, I am not even joking. Like it wouldn't be as crazy as like Piranha 3D, but it would, and it wouldn't be like, it'd be like, actually, you know what? My version would probably be like Ryan Murphy's Jaws. You know what I mean?
For sure.
It's that kind of like, just, we don't we're going for it with the gore and we're going for it with the kills, but also we know what we're doing here. There's some
Yeah.
camp involved.
It was funny because I used to, as a lot of kids do, I used to go and stay at my grandparents' house for like summers and stuff like that. Um, and I would stay in their guest room, and there was a shelf with a bunch of like old crappy paperbacks, like very
Yes.
clearly worn paperbacks. And Jaws was there, and I was like, 10, probably way too young to read it actually. And I was like, oh, this, well, I'm not allowed to watch the movie. Maybe I'll read the book because I'm in that room. And so
Oh,
I
wow.
read I read a bunch of those things. Um, and I remember being like, and then when I saw the movie, I was like, I don't remember.
No.
Did didn't Hooper and Mrs. Brody have like
Mhm.
no, I guess. And Hooper dies in that book. Spoilers
Yes.
because
Yeah.
thematically he has to because
Y
he's the adulterer.
the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really an interesting adaptation, but you're absolutely right. Like I would love because they did that. They did that in the 90s. They made Peter Benchley's The Beast, which
Yes.
sucks
Yes.
as a book.
Yes.
Um, and it's just a crappy like, schlocky TV movie or
Yep.
miniseries. I actually really enjoy the movie Orca, which is not based on his book,
Oh,
but I think
mhm.
is like that is the tone of what the actual novel is. It's just kind of,
Yes.
oh man, the orca coming out of the water looks so stupid in that movie, and I love it so much.
It's
But
like, well, and that's what else is really fun too, is I guess if you took if it were my if it were Clarke Wolfe's Ryan Murphy's Amity, Peter Benchley's Jaws, aka Amity. The one nod I would keep to Spielberg's movie, which by the way, audience, is a perfect film as far
yeah,
as
of
I'm
course,
concerned. It is
absolutely,
in my top 5. If Labyrinth didn't pull on my heartstrings, Jaws might be like my favorite movie of all time.
sure,
But what I would keep from that in my more faithful adaptation of the book would be not really seeing the shark. I mean, I don't like, I think that's actually quite brilliant. And of course, we'll see the shark eventually.
yes,
But so I think that's like a good way to like do your little hat tip, like, hello, sir, Uncle Stevie, we see you. And your movie is just it's just one of the best movies ever made.
hmm
And so we tip our hat to you, but we are just adapting the book at this time. We are not remaking your film, you know?
yeah. And I think that's the way to do it. And you should be able to do stuff like that. And I think like, not to keep talking about Mike Flanagan, but that is the perfect way to do it. It's like, I'm going to adapt this book I like, and also recognize that people know the movie better than the book, or like
Yes.
that on screen, this version is the one that they know and things like that. I think there's room for all that stuff. People get so sniffy about remakes, but readaptations I think are fine and,
And
and, and should be fine.
I wish we just like use that language a little more clearly.
Yeah.
Like I always tried when I wrote for Nerdist, I always tried to use that language. Like they're adapting. There's a new adaptation of this book. We
hmm
are not remaking. Like it's not the same thing. I honestly like sincerely believe that it is not the same. We're not remaking a movie that is an adaptation of the book. We are readapting the book.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um, I would be remiss if I didn't talk because we've been talking about The Shining a lot, and
yeah,
you directed a thing
I did.
that is an adaptation of The Shining in a way,
Yes.
very clearly inspired by The Shining. It's called A Shining Example.
It
Please
is.
tell us a little bit about it, and then I will tell you how I knew you read the book. Uh, from that, go ahead, please.
Yes, great. I love this. This makes me so happy. Well, so I mentioned it earlier, but I used to host a show called Wolf's Call for AMC, and I did like kind of in rapid succession when I would do a deep dive into these movies. I did The Shining, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and I did Scott Derrickson's Sinister, and I think
Mm,
I did like one more that was sort of these creatively frustrated dads who took that frustration is exercised on their families, right? They take that out on their families. And I thought to myself, I don't know if I've ever seen that with a mom. I don't know if I've ever seen that with a woman because, I don't really think that we like culturally prioritize women's creativity, right? Like especially if you're a mom. If you're a mom, your job in life, no matter who you were before having a child, is child number one, and
Mhm.
then you can maybe have a life once they turn 18, right? At least that's kind of how it feels as a woman looking
Sure.
out into the world.
Yeah.
So, and I thought a little bit about Hereditary, like, her work and her creativity kind of gets in there, but that's not really the focus, right?
Right.
So I had the opportunity at the end of our show, our producer called and said, "Okay, we're going to make 4 short films. Would you want to direct one?" And I was like, "Yes, I would love to." And I actually already had taken a stab at writing this script, which was, okay, let's play around with the framework of The Shining. Because also, I'll be honest with you, like, I, as a cinephile, have to watch that movie and have to know that movie, especially somebody who loves film and loves horror. But I don't love that movie. And now I've come around on it, actually. So I really find, in my opinion, I think that Kubrick is incredibly successful at what he set out to do. But I guess what I feel with the film is that they don't talk about the fact that Kubrick, I believe, hates Danny and Wendy and
Mm.
wants you to think it's fun to watch Jack chase these people around, because guess what? It is fun. It's fun to watch Jack Nicholson as this like wolf, like stalking these two, I'm sorry, kind of annoying characters at
Yep.
points, right? And I think that's intentional. I don't think I'm not criticizing a performance here. I'm saying I think Kubrick wanted you to hate this family.
Right.
And then I grew up like not really loving the movie, and then I read the book and I was like, "Oh, well, I get actually what Stephen King is saying about, no, Kubrick's movie is very cold, my movie is very hot, or my book is very hot. Danny and Wendy are great characters. Like, they are great characters. And this is, again, why I wish somebody could have the time and the space to really adapt The Shining with a budget. And and because respectfully to Mick, I don't know if all the resources were there. I know that they had money back then, of
Sure.
course, but like, I don't know if the tech was there. I don't know if the the way we told miniseries then was very different than the way. And I love Steven Weber, for the record. Like, we are friendly in real life.
Mhm.
I love his reading of it, the audiobook.
That's how I read it.
Right?
Yeah.
Same. I always tell people, just let Steven Weber tell you a story. Um, but so this is a long way of saying that, as a fan, a horror fan, a pop culture fan, maybe I have some things to say about Stanley Kubrick's movie. And so this all got kind of wrapped up into a shining example. And that is, so it is the story of Aiden, a very successful TV writer who put her career on hold when she had her daughter. And now her daughter is, a little older. She's a preteen. She's a little more self-sufficient. And the opportunity has come up for her to like show run, a spin-off of like a CSI style, TV series. And so, it's her time now, and her husband is not particularly helpful. And he also now wants to have creative pursuits himself, played by the incredible Andy Cohen, not from Bravo.
I was gonna say not from Bravo, not
Yeah,
that one.
not that one, but Andy's so good in the movie. So yes, so that is the premise of A Shining Example.
And because it's a 15-minute long short, and you get it's this is such a stupid thing to say, but it's a complete story. You don't feel
No,
like, oh, it's very short, and you get all
thank
the
you.
characters really, really well. I I hated the husband character immediately, which I understand is the point, and also like I love the little moment you gave it. Not this it's on the festival circuit. Hopefully soon you will be able to watch it anywhere at
Yes.
home, folks. But um, I love the little moment when Aiden, your character, uh, like sees something of herself in her daughter, because that is something in The Shining. The book is that Danny and Jack doesn't simply resent Danny. He
Yes.
also loves him and doesn't want anything bad to happen to him, and yet is being taken over by his own demons and the demons of this house. And so that was a really nice moment. I was just like, yeah, it's not the daughter's fault. And I like it that, obviously that's
Yeah.
part of the ending as well. The other thing that made me realize you read the book, and this was a book thing, is croquet.
Yes. The croquet mallet.
Croquet mallet, I think, is very much that's a huge difference from the movie. And what you were saying about like we like watching Jack Nicholson run around. Like, this is 1980. it's the same year Friday the 13th came out. There is something really,
Mhm.
there was in the weeds maybe in the late 70s about watching the bad guy kind of go be bad and stuff like that. There was something weirdly cathartic about it to some people,
Yes.
which we're still sort of seeing. And, we're recording this the week after Joker 2 came out. And that is a huge example of people being upset that what they got out of the first movie is not what the filmmakers got out of the first movie.
I can't wait for the documentary about the Joker and Joker 2.
Did you read that Variety piece that came out yesterday or this morning or whatever? Oh
I saw
boy.
the headline, but I have not
Ooh,
read it yet, but
it's worth reading.
I can't I'm so curious is what I mean, not
Yeah. But
yeah.
there's an element of popcorn about it too as well. But
Yes, it is a bit entertaining.
yeah. Yeah, so I think you and I have already spoken about this, but Clarke, would you like to come back on the show and talk about other movies and specifically holiday themed horror movies at a certain point?
You know, I'd love to.
Okay, that
Kyle,
sounds great. Yes,
I'd love to.
this is a part 1, everybody. This is a part
Yes.
1.
Surprise.
Surprise. Clarke will be back closer to the holiday season to talk about holiday themed spooky things, of which we touched a little bit on, but there are other holidays. It's not just Halloween. Actually, Halloween specific horror movies are pretty few and far between, or at least were for a long time.
True.
But yeah, so before then, because obviously you and I could talk for 20 more hours, but what do you have to plug that people can watch or find imminently?
Yes, well, and thank you again for mentioning Tenants. Tenants is a really fun indie horror anthology. I mean, truly made it very indie. But I'm so proud of it, and I have a segment in that movie that I'm in. I didn't direct any, but yeah, it's I'm really proud of it. You can rent it or buy it on VOD if you want to support indie filmmakers. If you want to support indie horror, I think that's a really great way to do it. And you can find me on social media at Clarke Wolfe, Clarke with an E, Wolf with an E on Instagram, on X and on whatever, all the things. I'm on all of them pretty much. But stay tuned because I have something coming up that is horror adjacent, that will involve myself directing and co-producing with my dear friend Sam Levine of Inglorious Bastards and Freaks and Geeks fame. We're teaming up for a horror project, so we'll be announcing that closer to Thanksgiving. But yeah, please stay tuned. So follow me on social at Clarke Wolfe, Clarke with an E, Wolf with an E. And Kyle, thank you again for this. Was such a fun topic, and I really could keep going. Like,
I know.
there
I
are
was
just
like,
so many.
when you were like, I've been here for an hour, and I was like, has it been an hour? Like, yes, it has. Like, heavens be. Yeah, absolutely, Clarke. It's you're one of my favorite people in the whole world. So, and especially to talk about horror with, because that's a topic very dear to my heart, and it's just a fun topic to talk about. But yes, Clarke will be back. We'll talk more horror later on. For now, though, you can follow me on Instagram, functional_nerd. You can also follow me on Letterboxd, the aforementioned Letterboxd, Kyle_Anderson. It is the Halloween season, so I'm watching a lot of horror movies, and so you can watch along. I haven't watched a single Italian movie this October yet, and I think that's a huge problem because I'm big into Italian horror, as many people know. Anyway, yeah, thank you again, Clarke. Thank you all for listening. I've been Kyle Anderson. Join me again next week on Laser Focus when my guest will be a different person. Bye-bye. Laser Focus is a production of Nerdist Industries and Legendary Digital Networks. It was produced, edited, and hosted by me, Kyle Anderson. For more, visit nerdist.com.